Gotee Records is the label home to Cochran and Company, Joseph O'Brien, John Reddick, Ryan Stevenson, Tyrion, all who have been on this podcast. So let's talk to their boss, the president of Gotee Records. My guest is Joey Elwood.
What else with Corey, man? This guy can podcast like nobody can. What else with Corey, man? You will look deep inside of yourself and feel something you've never felt when he asks what else with Corey, man.
Welcome to the podcast, Joey Elwood. Joey, introduce yourself.
My name is Joey Elwood. My biggest claim to fame is I'm friends with my man Corey, and we're both domers.
You got to set your goals higher. Joey, I'm trying to remember the first time we met. You provide me with such a friendship that I feel like we pick up where we leave off. You're always so kind to me, and I feel like I got a bro in you. But do you remember where we first met?
I don't. My first memory really, my memory's shot, Corey, honestly. It's just shot. But my first memory is us talking about small talk. And I know we met before then. I just don't know where. But my mind just starts from the 1 yard line is us talking about you doing the illustration for small talk.
Okay, I think that might be in the lobby of a hotel in Florida.
I think you might be right.
Like a Christian radio event, and you might have been with my good friend Brad Moist as well.
I think you're right.
That feels about right. There's a kinship. We have a lot in common. We're close in age. I want to get into your origin story, Joey. Is Washington, D.C. where it all starts for you?
Yep, in Northern Virginia. I grew up inside the Beltway, about 7-8 miles outside of D.C.
I have zero education about that neck of the woods. What was that area like as you were growing up?
It was super interesting, Corey, because back then the government held the promise of taking care of you if you worked hard and you gave a 30-year career to the government. They would pay your way from that day forward. So that was attracting the best and the brightest minds from the biggest schools, like the Harvards, the Yales, the University of Michigans, the Columbias. I mean, all my friends, parents had doctorate degrees, and it was an interesting moment in the 70s in DC. It was people who wanted to be public servants. It was, but it was this weird blend between the Southern charm and kind of the Northern kind of swag. It kind of had it had its own personality for sure.
I heard the word parents in there. This is one of my personal favorite questions to ask. Who's mom and dad?
Mom and dad's Joe Elwood. My mom wouldn't let me be a junior, so he changed the middle name. And then my mom is Dee Elwood. He's from the Florida area by way of Key West. And my mom, she comes from that Tyler Childers world of Eastern Kentucky, West Virginia, Tennessee, coal mining girl.
Siblings?
Yep. 2 older brothers and an older sister. I'm the baby. I'm the caboose.
Wow. Okay. Growing up in that area, what's a teenager Joey Elwood into?
Man, basketball and music. Those are my 2 loves. And I never learned to play music, but DC's not really known as a music town, but it had great radio stations, and they had music. It was mostly R&B that came out of Howard University, WHUR radio.
I love that you remember the radio. That had an impact on you. Oh
my gosh. I mean, those DJs had a huge impact on me. I remember their sign-off songs. We used to tape their shows. It was great. It was great, man.
Tell me about your time at George Washington University.
Loved it. It was a city school, and so you don't even know you're on the campus unless you know. But what was great, and I didn't really appreciate till I left, was the people who came in and taught from the State Department, the World Bank. We had some amazing professors there, and we had some amazing events there, presidential events, Department of Treasury events, all kinds of crazy stuff that I didn't take really full advantage of. But it was a great school.
I think there's 2 types of kids. I know they've changed in 2024, but at least when you and I were younger, I think 2 types of kids were, I know what I want to do, so I'm going to go to college to pursue it, or the lesser, I'm going to go explore and maybe something will awaken in me when I get to college. Which one were you? Did you have a vision, or is like, I just know that this is the next step after high school?
Yeah, I was the latter, 100%. I stumbled, tripped, fell, broke my collarbone, everything on my way to figuring out what I wanted to do.
Did you ever get a glimpse of, I think I want to do fill in the blank?
No, I honestly, I was so, practical. My mom and dad were so practical. I started out trying to be very practical. I got a finance degree and I hated it. I hated every class. I hated the whole thing. But my classes I loved were my English classes. And I knew my dad and mom would not let me get an English degree. So, or at least not pay for it if I got an English degree. So yeah, I went and worked for a bank. And I knew if I stayed, the money would be too good, and I would never leave. And so I quit before I could get to that place. And then I stumbled into the music business.
Stumbled into the music business. What an interesting phrase that you choose there. Before we get into music business, according to the internet, I don't know if you've heard about the internet, but there's a lot of information. You worked on Capitol Hill for a time?
Yeah, for about a little bit less, a touch less than a year.
What was that like?
It was amazing. Honestly, probably one of the best experiences of my life. If anybody can do it, I would highly recommend it.
Well, obviously, because I know what your profession is, but there was no kind of political aspiration bug at all that nipped you at that time?
I think there was, actually. I think there was. But, being, not that this is what you want to do on this podcast, but being super vulnerable, I don't know that I had the wherewithal emotionally to connect the dots to begin that journey.
Interesting. Because
I think there was a lot of low self-esteem tumbling around in my soul back then. And I didn't know what I was worthy of. And so I just kept waiting for somebody to pull. I didn't know it at the time, but looking back on it, I kept waiting for somebody to pull me into something. We can get into that a little bit later, but of what I got pulled into. But I think if I had the wherewithal emotionally that I think I have now, I probably would have still be on Capitol Hill. I really loved that moment in my life.
Wow. Okay. I don't want to make any assumptions about who listens to this podcast. I know that I've created a standard for contemporary Christian music artists, and then, we branch out a little bit. We get into management, we get into record labels, and Joey, you are definitely record label, but the elephant in the room is you got an interesting family member that a lot of our listeners would know, and that's Toby Mac. I would love to scratch a little bit at that relationship. Were you guys inseparable growing up? Were you, did you see each other at Thanksgiving and Christmas? What was that relationship like early on?
So kind of inseparable really, really early. I grew up in DC is a very Catholic town. So I grew up in a Catholic family. Toby's mom and dad, they kind of dabbled a little bit. And then Toby's dad, he found Jesus. And when that happened, I didn't see Toby for 5-6 years, except for probably Christmas and Thanksgiving. And then when we got cars is when we linked back up again. And when that happened, we hung out a lot. I mean, me and Toby we were close. We were definitely very close. Other than that 5 or 6 year period where we lost each other for a second.
Can I ask about your faith?
I got to be honest with you. I don't know that I really had one until I was probably 25. I grew up, and I think really the condensed version is there's gonna be people calling in or maybe writing in saying how wrong I am on this, but I think I'm a product of my father's faith. He prayed for me. It just at the age of 25, somebody handed me a Bible because they knew I like to read books, and it was just a nice enough Bible that I didn't want to not honor the gift. And I opened it in James and went from James to Revelation and from Genesis back to James, and that was it, man. I was floored. Something
resonated with you, and you found this purpose, this peace, this grace. Yep. I love that. 5 or 6 years away from a tight-knit cousin relationship. Tell me about that conversation when you did reconnect with him. Was it a, hey, where you been? Was it a, what have you been doing? What was that conversation like?
Well, we would see each other on holidays, but I think it was more based around, we were 16 and we had cars, and I didn't have a car. We had licenses, and Toby was probably in the midst of getting one, and and then I got one, and we were really our reconnection was really around music and around just finding out who we were and going out and going to places and dancing and meeting girls and going to basketball games and just, all that stuff you do like when you're young in high school. That's what we were talking about, that's what we were doing. And we always had very similar taste in music and what we wanted to do for the evening.
What's the first piece of music that comes to mind when I ask you, you got mom and dad's car, you are going to one of these basketball games, I'm guessing cassette? What are you putting in for your soundtrack to go to the basketball game?
Oh, man. So it was an 8-track player.
Google it. Those of you listening right now, go Google that.
And you know what, man? It was, I listened to a lot of old stuff. I had a brother who was 12 years older than me. And so I listened to a lot of old stuff. I mean, anything from Hendrix to, and I would listen to weird stuff like Nat King Cole even. And, but occasionally it was R&B, because I was in DC. I grew up with urban radio, and so I really, really loved Marvin Gaye, and I listened to him a lot. And that was the beginning of hip hop. So I didn't have hip hop on 8-track, so I didn't listen to it in the car. But whenever I was out of the car, I listened to a lot of early hip hop.
I resonated with Run DMC and Beastie Boys back and forth.
So you just hit me. We're kissing cousins, man, on that one, because those are my two. Those are my two. There's a couple other ones, but those two were the ones that I just couldn't get out of the turntable, and I loved them. Loved them.
I'm going to try to do the Cliff Notes version. Toby goes off to Liberty. DC Talk happens. If the internet is also right on this, you're the tour manager during the New Thang album in the super early 90s. Did you have any tour manager experience?
No, zero. I mean, everything was, we were all, it was like, we were just, what's the term, just band-aided it the whole way, and it's just try to do common sense. But man, there were so many bad mistakes made by me along the way and others. The whole journey was a story on what not to do and somehow another surviving. And that was us. But it was pretty evident early that they were catching, there was something catching there. So in that, I was trying to catch up and trying to learn something that I was running into people who had a lot of experience. So we go out with a band with a tour manager that had been out like in the 80s with like, not the Rolling Stones, but somebody big, and here I am just trying to figure out the basics of the job. And there was always somebody who was always very kind and always would pull me aside and say, hey, buddy, this is what you might need to do.
I want to grab some of your words. You said bad mistakes along the way. Can you give me a bad mistake that you learned your biggest lesson from? Like you remember, you kind of had to go through the bad mistake to learn this valuable lesson.
This wasn't on the road, but I remember very early on when we started Gotee, me and Toby were talking and we needed a manager for our first band out of Eden. I'm sorry, a booking agent. And Toby goes, just go tomorrow morning, go down to CAA and talk to John Huey. So I show up at like 8:30, and I'm so proud of myself because I'm up and I'm there, and he walks in and he looks at me. He walks into his office, doesn't say a word. I'm like, uh-oh. And basically the lesson was, and he did it in a nice way, but a very direct way. He goes, Joey, don't ever assume again that you can have a meeting with me without calling, because it's just professional. You're a young kid who feels like the world is waiting for you, and it's not. You have to let order take place, and you have to basically be kind enough to make plans. And it shook me. Like it was like that big slap across the face. And I mean, I think some people would have thought John was being rude and mean, but he was just honest and direct in it, and it was a great lesson for me.
And it also paints a picture of how you respond to me when I just show up at the Gotee offices and you have kind of a look on your face. But now I'm putting together the stuff and I know to call. Thank you. Thank you for a roundabout way. Let's go to 1994. Yeah. I would love for you to pull back the curtain on the conversation of the origin of Gotee Records.
Well, it's super simple. It was 100% Toby. Going back to the things I was telling you, I was waiting for somebody to pull me into something, right? And so I had zero vision for a label. I think Toby did, but he was, he was very much, on the road trying to make it happen for DC Talk. But he was finding all these kids out there that really wanted to make a go of it, like he wanted to make a go of it, like 3 or 4 years earlier. And so we, somehow or another, he stumbled onto a band out of Richmond, Virginia, that moved to Nashville. 3 girls. Mother was a choral director at TSU or Fisk. I'm sorry, Fisk Jubilee Singers. I mean, that's a prestigious job. And anyways, long story short, he just, he kind of would talk me into things along the way. Like, hey, just go meet with them. Hey, just go. Let's figure out if we can do a song. And hey, go talk to our lawyer and see if we can get a contract in. And all these things. And I was like, all right, Toby, all right, I'll do it. And slowly but surely, we signed a band and we tried to get him signed to another label. And I think there would have been 1 or 2 labels maybe that would have signed him because they just trusted Toby. Toby's like, hey, why don't we just do it ourselves? And I'm like, huh? Like, what does that even look like, Toby? And so anyways, he just kept talking me into things. And I'm thankful for it because, again, I needed somebody to pull me into something, to kind of rouse in me what was there. That's the early beginnings. That's the Cliff Note version of how we started.
Are you familiar with the movie Jerry Maguire, Joey?
Yep.
That part when Tom Cruise stays up all night and he writes this 25-page mission statement called The Things We Think and Do Not Say. If you were to write a book about the launching of a record label 30 years in the rearview mirror, by the way, as I record this, what would the title of that mission statement be?
Thank God nobody gave us $1 million.
Thank God nobody gave us $1 million.
Because we would have absolutely used every cent of it probably in a month, and nothing would have happened. Like because we had really nothing. It just every day was about just our ability to what's the word? When you have to kind of like improvise. And you had to think of ideas that probably don't make sense, but they end up making sense because you just tried it, But when you have money, you don't usually try things. You just hire things. You just kind of you just do what everybody else is doing, and you just try to outspend people. But when you don't have it, it's amazing what's possible to happen. So I'm just really thankful we never had a bunch of money, because I don't know that we would be here still.
Where does Gotee come from?
My memory is this might take a second. I was in Nashville for a year doing the tour manager thing, and I said to Toby, I don't know if I can be on the road, buddy. That's not my life. I get it, but I can't do that, man. So I went to New York for a year and really pursued what I thought was my first dream, and that was to be a playwright.
Wow.
Yeah. So I went there for a year and took some classes at a school called HB Studio on Bank Street in the West Village. Yeah. So I went there and I turned into Jack Kerouac. I mean, I was just beat city, had a goatee. I looked like somebody that was homeless, and it was terrible. But I was vibing, man, and I was in it. I was playing the character. I was living the character. I was all in. I was a movie. I was a walking movie, man, and I was the lead role in my movie. And so the summer after my first year there, Toby said, "Hey, why don't you just come stay with me? I know New York. I know you said New York's a tough city to live in. Just come stay with me for the summer." I thought that was a good idea, and so I came back. And long story short, I never left. I never went back to New York. I stayed because Toby kept saying, "Hey, why don't we try this? Why don't we try that?" And he kept just drawing me in. But I was still in garb. I was still in character, right? And all of a sudden, I think the vibe I was carrying kind of rubbed off on a bunch of us. And we started a production company. And when people would hire us, they would say, "Oh, just hire the Gotee brothers." And so we just rolled with it. And so people would call us and go, "Hey, man, I hear I need to call the Gotee brothers to work on this song for us," And that's how it went.
Were you guys rocking goatees back then?
Oh yeah,
okay.
We all had our goatees, man. We were doing it.
Let me get the title right, or at least you correct me. Would President and CEO of Gotee Records, is that correct?
No, I would just say president. If Toby has a title, he would be CEO, because he kind of is the vision of the whole thing.
Launching a new artist in 2024 compared to 1994 Out of Eden and Loving the Day. You know, you remember that one. I'm sure a lot has changed, but here's the big three things, according to Joey, that has to happen when launching an artist now.
I don't think much has changed in some ways. In a lot of ways, it's changed. It's changed. Don't get me wrong. But in the big ways, I don't know that it has changed. I think you have to be patient. They call Nashville a 10-year town for a reason. And 10 years is allegorical. It's not, or metaphorical maybe. I'm not sure which one it would be, but it's one of the two. And it just takes time. It takes time. Unless you just get this runaway smash hit quick. And usually they don't really happen quick. So it looks like it's quick, but it just takes time. I think you can never be, if you try to be the vision for an artist, it always ends up failing. You have to find artists with a clear vision and get behind their vision. If not, you just kind of are doing something that feels a little wonky. And a person who can sing that doesn't have a vision but is doing everything you tell them to do, it collapses eventually. And I think the third thing is to realize that there is not one way that it's going to happen, and you cannot hold on too tightly to the steering wheel or it will never happen.
So there's not a formula or chemistry of this has to happen, A has to happen, then B, then C, then D. It changes all the time.
All the time. I'd say every single time.
I'm going to guess in the last 30 years of this record label, there has been risk. Would you agree? There's been risk taken?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Could I have three big risks?
Yeah, I think the first signing, Out of Eden, three girls doing R&B pop and Christian music at that time. If you had a room full of people if we had a board and of people that were working in Christian music at the time, there's no way we probably would have been able to sign them. You would not want to put $10 behind it, but nonetheless 10,000 or whatever, 100,000. It didn't make financial sense to pursue that one because there was no lane for that at the time. There was no proven concept, I guess is a better way to put it. And
they were young, right? Am I doing the math right? Like 12, 15, 17?
100% right.
Wow.
I still wake up at night sometimes going, did we take it seriously enough? These young girls being on the road, God protected them, but I honestly, there are days I wake up and go, oh, like what were we doing? But they were amazing. And because of their strength and their character, it worked. I don't know that we were a good covering. When I say covering, I mean loosely, like as a label, not as their parents or anything like that. But I don't know that we covered them correctly. But I do know that, thank God, that they were raised right and they did it on their own. That's one risk. I think every time that we signed a band, we signed a reggae band, we signed a rap band. We signed some metal bands, there are some proof of concept for the metal stuff and maybe a little bit for the rap stuff, but definitely not for reggae. It was just tough. It was tough, man. Yeah, but it was also exciting because I think people were excited by the challenge. Even the radio people that we would meet and the concert promoters, they kind of admired it, but they looked at you like, are you sure you want to do this, But again, we were seizing the day. Like we weren't thinking we had no 5-year plan. We're like, hey, I wonder if this can work. It was so naive that it was dumb.
What was the name of the reggae band?
Christafari. And they actually played the Reggae Sunsplash tour in America with all these huge reggae bands like Buju Banton and John Huey got them on this huge reggae tour in America. So they were knocking some things down back then. So it was great. I don't know I'm trying to think of a third one. It really comes down to the bands we signed. Like I saw have you ever seen Chris Blackwell's speech when he got inducted to the Hall of Fame, Rock and Roll Hall of Fame? He was the founder of Island Records.
Oh, okay.
So Chris
home of U2 early on.
Yeah. And Bob Marley.
Yes.
And a bunch of bands. And so they asked him, so in his speech, he says, and he's a Jamaican. He was a Jamaican. He was a white Jamaican whose parents were English, but they moved to Jamaica, Anyways, long story short, his speech was, I made 3 good decisions. And so here I stand and you guys are honoring me. First good decision. I signed this kid out of the ghetto of Kingston named Bob Marley. Second good decision. I signed a 17-year-old out of Birmingham, England named Stevie Winwood. third good decision. I signed a bunch of Irish rogue teenagers out of, I think, Belfast. I can't remember where it was. Named U2. Because I made 3 good decisions, and I'm proud of those decisions. But that's really what I did, and I'm thankful and that you guys are wanting to put me in this place. But really, those 3 bands are what got me here. So, all of our decisions were risk, and we made a lot of bad. Not when I say bad decisions, it's not ever a bad decision when you sign a band. It just doesn't work out. But when you get one that really works, you look like a genius. But really, it was just one of 10% of your chances that you took that happened to pan out.
Joey, you've been such a champ. 2 more questions. You good?
Yep.
Second to last question. 30 years, we're celebrating Gotee as you and I record this. Is there anything that you have not done yet with this label that is kind of the unicorn? It's up on that hill. I would still like to do this.
I think I would love to see one of our bands have an impact culturally beyond Christian music, not because I think Christian music is small and is limiting. I would just love to see artists of faith figure out how to really steer it. And they're doing it right now. You can name all the ones that have done it. I would just like to see one of our bands steer it in a way that was honoring to their faith, but also to their craft. And I think a couple people came close here. But I would love to see that happen. Because I think it's an amazing moment when somebody can nuance that correctly. It's hard, super hard.
This is a callback to when we first started talking and the impact of radio and the radio stations that you and I grew up with. I grew up across the lake from Chicago, and the 3rd largest market in America. Those guys are all rock stars. But there was one radio station that had an impact on me, and it was WDCT. And there was a guy named E-Train. Do you know whatever happened to that guy? And if so, is he still around?
Oh, yeah. WDCT, talk radio, man.
Joey, this has been a blast. I appreciate your craft. I love the way you lead. I watch from the sidelines. I love your label. And I was looking through everybody you've ever signed, and it has played a song in my life soundtrack. Reliant K, my goodness, we could do a half hour on those guys.
Yep.
So I just want to say how much I appreciate you and your label, Sonic Flood, Jeff Deo. Oh my goodness, so many. Here's to 30 years, my friend. I hope you celebrate accordingly. And do I dare say here's to 30 more?
Hey, man, if it's not me, hopefully the label, for sure, man.
Joey, thank you.
Thanks for having me, Corey. I appreciate it, brother.
What Else with Corey Mann, with your host, Corey Mann. Original music and theme song by Chris Cron. Share this episode with a friend, and thanks for listening.